Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about the books that I finished in the first half of February 2022. Now I do apologise if at any point during filming this there are some odd noises. Basically at the time of filming, Storm Eunice is just completely blowing a gale right now, and as I do live in... Can you hear that? And as I do now live in the south of England, which is where it's being hit particularly hard, yeah, definitely expect some noises. But yeah, in terms of the reading that I have done in the first half of February, it's been a real mixed bag, as you will see. I had a DNF book and a 1-star, but then I also had like a good 5.25-ish star. Some books that I thought I wasn't going to enjoy quite as much but ended up absolutely loving, and others where I had quite high expectations for the book but then I was quite let down. As I've said previously, I am going to be a lot more DNF happy this year, especially with my larger TBR. I don't want to be holding on to books or trying to force myself to read books that I'm just not enjoying. So I'm not going to be looking these books on Goodreads, so I am going to be looking them in the DNF section of the story graph, and then I will just talk about them here. And the one book that I did DNF in the first half of February was Red Thread on Mazes and Labyrinths by Charlotte Higgins. This is a book that I picked up because it was the book club pick for a book club that I'm involved with along with a bunch of my work colleagues. This is a non-fiction read and it seemed like it was going to be right up my street. Charlotte Higgins is quite well known for her new Greek myths collection, and this book basically tracks the concept of the maze or the labyrinth through mythology and through history and art, and basically what this concept of the maze or the labyrinth really means for us. Why is this a motif that we keep going back to? So that seemed like a really interesting concept, but unfortunately I just did not get on with this book at all. It feels like your traditional non-fiction book, but like very much peppered in with a lot of memoir-y things that I just did not care about. There's a lot of things in here about why she personally really is into Greek myth, different email correspondence that she had with other people in the field, and the impressions that they made very personally on her. And I'm like, that's great and all, but why should I care? And I have noticed in the past where that kind of topic-focused non-fiction mixed with memoir just doesn't really work for me. I've had it with things like Bookworm by Lucy Mangan. It kind of feels a bit harsh to say, but if like Charlotte Higgins was more of a personality and was more of a public figure, then maybe it could kind of work for me. I feel like if it was somebody like Stephen Fry, who is such a character in himself, talking about this and peppering it in with bits from his life, then I would have been interested in that. But I'm like, Charlotte, I don't know you. We don't have any connection and you haven't really built a connection up with me as a reader. So why do I really care about your email correspondence? Why can't you just tell me about mazes and labyrinths? Another issue that I found with this book from what I read was that I felt like you could have cut out a good 70% of what was there. Like I say, she does talk about this topic of mazes and labyrinths, but then she also dumps in a lot of stuff that is just nothing. The book in itself feels like a maze or a labyrinth that you have to wade through to get to the actual good stuff. There doesn't seem to be much of a structure here. There isn't a contents page and I can't really tell you what it is she's grouping all of these things that she's talking about by. And I feel like if this was going to be a useful non-fiction book that I would return back to again and again, there just needs to be a lot more clarity and a lot more structure. There was one point where she compared the Artful Dodger in Oliver to being like a Victorian Dickensian Odysseus, and I was just like, okay, these are some weird tenuous connections you're making here, Charlotte. Talking about how Oliver going down one wrong street was himself in a maze. It's a lot of like, life is a maze, the maze is life, and it just felt a little bit weird to me. So yeah, I'm not going to be continuing with this. I feel like if I give a book like 80 to 100 pages and it's not convincing me, then right now, the way that I'm feeling, I don't need to continue with that in my life. Then next on the pile, we have the first 1-star book of the year. Maybe I shouldn't be that harsh and it's more of a 1.5 star, but nevertheless, I didn't really get on with it, and that was The Intoxicating Mr Lavelle by Neil Blackmore. I'd previously seen a recent release by Neil Blackmore that I believe is about Francis Bacon, as in the 16th, 17th century author and philosopher as opposed to the painter. I believe that book is The Dangerous Kingdom of Love, and that looked really interesting, but I was waiting for that to come into paperback. Meanwhile, I saw this in a charity shop and thought that seemed really interesting. I'd like to get a taste of his writing style, and I feel like maybe me and Neil Blackmore could get on. Maybe if I pick up the Francis Bacon book, then I'd be really into it, because the issue I found with this book was not the writing style, but rather the plot and the characters. So this book is set in the 18th century. It is about two brothers, Benjamin and Edgar, who have been very much isolated by their parents. Their mother has kept them away from society and has decided to rear them very much isolated, but still trying to train them for the outside world as being like master intellectuals and philosophers, keeping them into a very strict regime of education. However, once the brothers become of age, the they are sent out on their grand tour, where, like many rich young men of their day, they are going out into Europe, going to the different cities and getting a taste of high society. And this is their real first taste of freedom. We get a sense very quickly how different the two brothers are and how they've reacted differently to their mother's isolation of them. Edgar, who really reveres his mother, who sees her as like the fount of all wisdom, and Benjamin, who is a lot more skeptical and sees through his mother's faults a lot more clearly and how she really hasn't prepared them for the world. So he's already got a bit of a rebellious streak, but he hasn't really had the chance to really test it yet. And along the way on their grand tour, Benjamin comes across the eponymous Mr Lavelle, who is completely different to everything that Benjamin has encountered up to now. He's very like anti-establishment, he's very loud and boisterous, he likes to tell the world how he doesn't care, and he's one of those characters who basically, whatever the societal norm is, he will go out of his way to do the opposite. I was really enjoying this book up until the point where we met Lavelle, and then after that I was just like, because I could not stand this character. I just found him so incredibly irritating. Because as I say, I don't feel like he's a character who does what he does because he has this very strong, like, moral sense of injustice. He does it basically to shock people. He does it because he knows he'll get a rise out of the people he's around. He is just trying to be different for the sake of being different. And I know through the course of the book, Blackmore tries to give Lavelle more of a sad backstory, but I don't know, it just did not work on me. And the way that this plays out is, as you might be able to imagine, Benjamin starts to fall in love with Mr Lavelle, and they end up developing a relationship, which obviously for the time that this is set is a major no-no. But the thing is, I just did not buy this romance, and I didn't really like the way that Benjamin completely did a 180 on his character as soon as he met Lavelle. He just becomes this like sad, lovesick puppy who was just kowtowing to everything that Lavelle did or said, which for me just didn't really mesh up with this like slightly rebellious dynamic character that we had at the beginning of the book. And this book definitely takes it down the road of these two are genuinely in love, and they are both in the right for their views of the world, and society is wrong for denying them. But at the same time, I'm just like, this guy? This guy? This very toxic man who is basically tearing you away from your brother and making you into somebody who is just utterly dislikable just like him. This is the couple that I'm meant to be rooting for. He's basically like a slightly mouthier 18th century version of Holden Caulfield. I just did not like him. And I'd have had so much respect for this book if the way that the plot turned out was that Benjamin came to realise how toxic Lavelle was, and how he may be grateful for Lavelle for making him realise what his sexuality is, and realising that his family is toxic and that he needed to get away from them, but also that Lavelle himself is toxic and that he is not a person that he should give his love to, that Lavelle was manipulating him, because that's how it felt on the page. But no, the way that this ends up is that it is a tragic love story. But I'm sorry, Neil, you could not make me care for this man. This is not a man to give your heart to, Benjamin. You can do so much better. So I feel like this had a lot of promise, but basically from the point that we meet Lavelle from like page 70 onwards, I just hated it. I hated where the plot went. I hated this character. I think he is the most insufferable character that I've come across this year so far. No. Oh gosh, we're almost 90 minutes into filming and I've only done 2 books. Next up, we have Scenes of a Graphic Nature by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is a contemporary book about the main character of Charlie, who is a filmmaker. She's really been struggling to get her film career to take off. However, a short film that she's made with her friend Laura, which was all about her father's experiences as a young man living in Ireland, ends up being entered into a short film competition. Basically, her father was the lone survivor of this massive tragedy that ended up killing everybody at the school that he went to. He just happened to have been called out of class that day and himself did not end up a victim. However, when she ends up going to Ireland for this film festival, she starts to find that from what people who were connected to this town are telling her, that maybe her father's account does not quite mesh up with what happened in reality, or at least what these people are telling her happened in reality. She ends up travelling to the little island that he grew up on and starts to uncover more about this event. To be honest with you, I thought this book was going to be much more about filmmaking, much more like a personal, quiet, character-focused story. I feel like that's what other people are doing, describing it to me as. And this turned much more into like a murder mystery, whodunit crime book than anything else. It does get pretty dark and eerie. I feel like Caroline O'Donoghue captured this feeling of this very isolated island very well. But I will say that I found this kind of forgettable for myself. I didn't really latch onto any of these characters and I didn't find the plot particularly interesting, which I feel really sad about saying because I know so many of my friends on BookTube have absolutely loved this book. But to be honest, it didn't really do much for me. Next up, we have The Marriage Game by Alison Weir. This basically recounts the life of Elizabeth I, and particularly her romantic entanglements during her reign, highlighting particularly her relationship to her favourite, Robert Dudley. It really explores the turmoil that Elizabeth faced, the intense pressure that she had from her ministers to marry, and tries to really paint a picture of her relationship with Dudley, why it is she ultimately did never marry, what could have been her personal reasons for her aversion to marriage. And this is a book that I feel like, had I not already been really into the topic, I probably would have ended up DNFing after the first few pages, because I feel like it is so repetitive and episodic. It is very much like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, rather than what I wanted, which was for a much more slower paced, character focused look at the psychology of Elizabeth. I feel like this book really does breeze through like 30-40 years in a way that wasn't always satisfying for me. I never felt like we were able to linger on any moment very well, but I feel like because I really like this history, because I already knew this history, I felt like I could just keep going with it. There were also many points with this where I felt like I was just reading a non-fiction book with dialogue thrown in, rather than Alison Weir doing a real good job of building up the world herself. I do think it's nice that Alison Weir very clearly respects a lot of the source material, though there are some things that she does go her own way on, certain elements that she does fictionalize, but I feel like she very clearly doesn't try to over-sensationalize Elizabeth. And I feel like something that made me really appreciate this book was the fact that very soon after reading this, I ended up watching the first Kate Blanchett Elizabeth film, which I'd previously never seen before. I had seen Elizabeth the Golden Age, but I'd not seen that first film. And I think if anything was going to make me appreciate the historical accuracy and veracity of this book, it was going to be that first Elizabeth film, because oh, it's bad. Like, maybe from a filmmaking standpoint it's a good film, but like from a historical accuracy point, it's just I was cringing so much. Whereas I could really appreciate in this that at least for the most part Elizabeth Weir did stick to how these characters actually were like and things that they actually did. There are certain elements of Elizabeth's story when it comes to love and marriage that I feel like Alison Weir did have to editorialise on, and she does have to speculate on because we just don't have the evidence. For example, her relationship with Thomas Seymour is alluded to and touched upon, and it's very clear the stance that Alison Weir is taking on that relationship and how far it went, as well as how far Elizabeth went with her relationship to Robert Dudley. These are things that we can never really truly know, but for the sake of narrative she did have to make a decision, and I can respect that even if I don't always agree. So yeah, I would say that this as a historical fiction novel is fine. I'm glad that I read it. I think if you're new to Elizabeth I, then you could find worse places to start than this. And then to end my wrap up for February, I have 2 series that I continued on with, so I will just talk about them back to back. And that's a bit of a rarity for me. I'm not really much of a series girl, but apparently I was in the mood. So firstly, I read Take a Hint, Dani Brown and Actual Age, Eve Brown, both by Talia Hibbert, which are books 2 and 3 in the Brown Sisters trilogy. After previously having read Get a Life, Chloe Brown back in October, I felt like it was finally the time to get back to this series, and I'm really glad that I did. I don't know if it was just because it was February and, you know, love is in the air. So many people are talking about their favourite romances that maybe I was just in the mood to pick up a romance book, but this is what I went for, and I'm very glad that I did. Take a Hint, Dani Brown follows the second eldest sister, Dani, who is very no nonsense, very intelligent, but also has this element of her personality that is kind of witchy. And this basically follows the fake dating trope, where after she is rescued by the security guard at her university, basically social media is rife with all of these rumours that they're actually dating. And because they find that this media attention is actually quite helpful for both of them, they decide that they are going to fake date. Spend a month being the perfect couple in everybody's eyes. But of course, sparks do really fly between Dani and Zaf, and it's not long before they are both pretty smitten with each other. At your age, Eve Brown follows the youngest sister, who basically, after a bunch of business ventures have failed, is told by her parents that she has a limited window in which to get her life together. That if she does not move out and get a job that she maintains for a year, then she is going to be cut off from her trust fund. She's being told by her parents that she needs to act her age and become more of a serious adult like her sisters. Eve is pretty distressed by this. She takes a drive around the Lake District and finds an advertisement up for a chef for a bed and breakfast. Eve is a pretty decent cook and she has had a few courses, so she ends up going to the interview, and she ends up bumping up against the bed and breakfast owner, Jacob, who seems to not like Eve at all. Though at the insistence of Jacob's friend, who is also interviewing her, he does reluctantly agree to give her a job. However, not long after this, Eve ends up hitting Jacob with her car, meaning that he has got a broken arm, and so is entirely reliant on Eve. Because Eve can't face going back to her family, she ends up surreptitiously taking the guest room without Jacob's knowledge, and so we've got this book that has this enemies to lovers, forced proximity, and once again, sparks do start to fly. I will say out of the 2 of them, probably Take a Hint, Dani Brown Brown was my favourite. And actually Eve Brown is maybe my least favourite of the three. I'd probably say it's Dani, then Chloe, then Eve, which I'm actually quite surprised by because I thought out of the three sisters that Eve was going to be the most like me in personality and Dani was going to be the least like me. Maybe that's a narcissistic reason for thinking that you're gonna like a book, but there we go. But no, I just feel like I found the banter in this really, really cute. And I think Saf was probably my favourite of the love interests. He likes to listen to romance audiobooks, like, we love a sensitive, well-read man. But if you are into contemporary romance, then I definitely recommend giving this series a go. I was just constantly smiling all the way through, and I feel like this series has reminded me how much I do enjoy a good romance every now and then, which is a bit dangerous for my TBR if I actually start to cash in on that impulse and buy books. And then lastly, my favourite books that I read in this first half of the month. The second series that I was continuing on with was Anne of Avonlea and Anne of the Island, both by L.M. Montgomery, the second and third books in the Anne of Green Gables series. I don't know what I can say about these books that is any different from the first book. These books basically continue on the theme of Anne being the most delightful character, of it being just so lovely and atmospheric, just seeing what different shenanigans she ends up getting into, how her relationships with the different people in her life grow. This book sees Anne for a year as a school teacher back in her hometown, whereas this book we see Anne finally getting to go to university, and also some romance goes down. I would say that maybe both of these books didn't have the same kind of gut punch impact that the first book did, but I was definitely squealing all the way through and thinking it was just adorable. And I would say if you've only ever read the first Anne of Green Gables, then definitely give these two a go. I do have books 4, 5 and 6 still to read, and I'm sure I'll be getting to them very soon. So there we go, those are all of the books that I read in the first half of February. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today, and let me know about any other books that you have read. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye!